I was at UCLA Film School and was kind of on fire at the time. Directing 3 short films, director of photography of 5 films, including a couple of music videos, and I went into that eventually as a director, camera operator, and steeped in the work of Philip K. Dick and Jorge Luis Borges and William Burroughs. So I was very much an anti-system science fiction person. As my first screenplay, or second screenplay, I adapted Philip K. Dick's Paycheck, which was almost optioned. And I heard that a film package was being looked at by an executive at Universal, Ed Neumeyer. And Ed and I realized that we had similar ideas. I had been outlining at the time this idea called Supercop, about a robotic suit that starts affecting the law enforcement officer's consciousness and turns him into a sociopath. So it was a bad lieutenant idea as an android. Ed's idea was more firmly in the Robocop lane. He had a solid first act of what became Robocop. We decided to collaborate. On nights and weekends while I was directing music videos and Ed was a story analyst at Universal, we wrote the speculative feature, the first draft of what became the original Robocop.
Drop it!
Having protested the Vietnam War and being a political activist in the 60s and 70s, I brought a sort of sociological perspective to the material through the media breaks and the nature of predatory capitalism, where Ed brought the idea of the boardroom, the study of robotics, and the graphic novel. So each of us were very different. You never marry yourself. So the fact that we were very different people and also worked differently was very helpful right up front.
Old Detroit has a cancer. The cancer is crime. And it must be cut out before we employ the 2 million workers that will breathe life into this city again.
Corporate gang link-up and picking Detroit as the setting are really bedrock for the story. Ed is responsible for picking Detroit, and his sense of the way Detroit historically manufactured tanks for Vietnam was this whole line that he felt very strongly about. The link up between the gang and the corporation I will take responsibility for. If you look at predatory capitalism, it will find a way in anyway to exploit the workers.
Dick Jones, Division President, OCP.
Every policeman knows when he joins the force that there are certain inherent risks that come with the territory. Ask any cop, he'll tell you. If you can't stand the heat, you better stay out of the kitchen.
Workers have become not as big a commodity now with union membership below 10%, but even at the time when we made the film, the rich needed workers. They needed the unions to manufacture their stuff. Now robots do it. But the fact that Detroit was a union town, once Ed firmly established to me that Detroit was the place, being a political activist, I found that the idea of the marriage of the corporation and the gang to be really appropriate. I mean, if you think about cartels buying soccer teams, criminal enterprises in general being fostered by American corporations, that was a nice, delicious link-up. And again, delivered both objective and subjective violence to the audience.
What brings you to this little paradise?
Beats me, man. I think OCP's moving a lot of new guys up here.
Omni Consumer Products. What a bunch of morons. They're gonna manage this department right into the ground.
We wrote a speculative first draft, which went to Columbia and I think Fox, and they both passed. We got it to John Davison, who gave it to Barbara Boyle, who was an executive at Orion. And Orion is built on the model of United Artists, which allowed producers and writers and actors to develop the material. They had 2 development executives and Mike Menavoy at the top. He greenlit Oliver Stone's war film Platoon and a number of other films, and allowed those scripts to be developed by the writers, the directors, and the producers. So Ed and I wrote a second draft, got a few notes from John Davison and Orion, and then wrote a third draft, which made its way to Paul. And he had just made Flesh and Blood for Orion. Ed and I went and saw it and Century City. Since Orion had done business with him, they sent him the script and he threw it in the trash. And his wife, Martine, who was a psychotherapist, pulled it out of the trash and read it and said, Paul, you should look at this again. He looked more closely at it and committed to the project, and that was really the hugest piece of luck. So we wrote a fourth draft for Paul, and he asked us to pull out the family, make Murphy a swinging bachelor, a la his European roots. I argued to Paul that one of the tropes in American cinema is threatening home. If you look at E.T., you look at a lot of these other films, Amityville Horror, and wisely he realized, yes, the family was a very important part of the project. Had us put it back in for the fifth draft, which was then greenlit.
Hi. Murphy transferring in from Metro South.
Nice precinct.
Yeah, pretty good.
You work for a living down here, Murphy. Get your armor and suit up.
We cast Peter Weller after looking at several other people. Peter Weller's performance being transferred in from a different precinct, I think allowed him to play a little bit of swagger as the stranger, and some competition with Lewis, who, by the way, we picked a name that was androgynous. Lewis could be a man or a woman. And the gun track's interesting because it folds in on itself. Ed had wanted to spoof T.J. Hooker, the cop show, which was the first thing we shot, and Ed and I operated the camera and shot that little clip.
Pretty fancy moves, Murphy.
Yeah, well, my son Jimmy watches this cop show, DJ Laser, and this laser guy does this every time he takes down a bad guy, so naturally my kid thinks every good cop should be...
And you don't want to disappoint him.
Yeah, well, role models can be very important to a boy.
The gun trick becomes this memory thing for Lewis. Prior to the torture murder, Murphy is doing it at the donut shop, and then in the hallway after the shooting range. It's a trigger for Lewis and the audience. And only the audience and Lewis know at this point. Everyone else in the film doesn't know that Murphy is in there, except for Morton and a few of the doctors. So that becomes another sort of like breadcrumbs of identity.
Hey, this crane ain't gonna outrun a cop. Slow down there. What, are you crazy, man? Shut the fuck up and do it. Just do it.
I think with our gang, that may be one of the most generic aspects of the story. There's an African American, there's a Chinese guy, there's a redhead, and there's Clarence. And they're all very comic book, very broadly painted.
You a good cop? Hot shot? Sure you are. Why, you gotta be some kind of great cop. Come in here all by yourself.
And Clarence in particular, as a wonderful sociopath, I think fulfills a kind of stereotype. If you really drill down into what composes a modern gang today, there are a lot of like terrible sociological reasons for why a person ends up on the wrong side of the law. But we couldn't stop there. We couldn't dwell on that. We couldn't slow down. So they're very much, I don't want to say stereotypes, but tropes. Clarence in particular. And people love the vernacular.
How you doing? Bitches leave.
I think that may be the least politically correct portrayal in the film, the sort of stereotypical gang members. But it's sort of like curly fries or onion rings, right? Where we were giving the audience what they wanted there.
See, I got this problem. Cops don't like me, so I don't like cops. Well, give the man a hand.
The torture murder is really an interesting evolution. One of the goals for Ed and I was to take away his body because we're going to turn him into a cyborg, a robotic creature. So losing the hand, the shot to the head, we wanted to communicate to the audience that he was dead. We wrote a very detailed description of how the gang, Clarence's gang, torture murders Murphy. Then Paul comes along. Being a young person during World War II, my theory is that European directors and African-American directors, they portray violence very differently. It's nasty and has consequences. Paul spent a long time shooting this thing, and for the kill shot to the head, Rob built a upper torso of Peter Weller that was powered by a bicycle, so that he rises up when he pedals, when the operator pedals, bang, and he's shot right there, linking Clarence's gun to Peter Weller's forehead. Then we submit it to the MPAA and they give it an X. Oh my God, we can't have an X rating for this film. R was hard enough to market, so we cut it back. There was another X. We cut it back again, and each time we cut it back, I thought it became more violent. But when we finally got a cut that everyone settled on, the MPAA gave it an R rating. And the intention was to tell the audience, this is a guy who's lost his body. We will be able to cut him up and put him into a cyborg-type robotic suit.
We get the best of both worlds. The fastest reflexes modern technology has to offer, onboard computer-assisted memory, and a lifetime of on-the-street law enforcement programming. It is my great pleasure to present to you Robocop.
Ed was really involved in the designing of the suit, and obviously Rob Bottin is a genius with that kind of stuff. Ed would bring in various conceptual artists to do drawings. The idea of this sleek, angled thing that felt like it could move fast, even though he was clunking around, with these forward angles and lines throughout the suit was very important. And Ed was very, very dialed into that, much more than I was. It was fun for me, and I had a few suggestions, but it was primarily Ed and Rob. And Rob, I don't think gets enough credit as sort of the fifth wheel in the whole thing. He had the suggestion that when we first see Robocop, it be on the video monitor when they pull the plastic off of him. Just first little taste of this illusion. Then he said, Paul, don't show him kicking open a door. So he walks behind frosted glass. We see him turn his back. Then he's behind this wire mesh. And each time you're getting closer and closer, but you don't see it all. And I think that was another major component for the audience buying the illusion of this guy who's really in a scuba wetsuit.
Reed! Yeah? He needs a car.
Thank you.
Sure. Anytime.
Oh, yeah. Go get him, boy.
Peter Weller consulted a very famous mime in order to get a lot of the movements right, so that he was more robotic. However, the name of Murphy and the flashback when he goes to the townhouse where he and his family lived, and the final pronouncement of Murphy for the audience was a kind of quest that was fulfilled for them.
I know you. You're dead. We killed you. We killed you.
The idea of identity was very important. We also talked a lot about the man in the iron mask, the person whose identity was taken away, and the quest to refine that identity. That was a very important part of our process as writers. One of the, I don't want to say unintended consequences, but the things we weren't completely aware of was the difference between subjective and objective violence. And most people are familiar with subjective violence, the reaction to which is vengeance. You hurt me, and then I personally respond because of feelings, subjective feelings I have about the assault. Most people are aware of that kind of justice. They're less aware of the nature of objective violence. Everything from predatory capitalism to war to accidents that happen to a person out of their control. In thinking about it subsequently, we were successfully able to combine subjective and objective violence so that in his pursuit of vengeance over his torture murder, Robocop discovered the corporate link with the gang.
I work for Dick Jones! Dick Jones! He's the #2 guy at OCP! OCP runs the cops! You're a cop!
And I think that's another reason why the story resonates so much with an audience, because both subjective and objective violence are dealt with through this one force. And it's a faceless force. Anyone can be inside that suit. That is also a kind of avatar. It's a blank slate. And an audience could project themselves into this metal head and satisfy both objective and subjective violence.
What's the matter, officer? I'll tell you what's the matter. It's a little insurance policy called Directive 4. My little contribution to your psychological profile. Any attempt to arrest a senior officer of OCP results in shutdown.
I saw the film in Times Square in a duoplex next to Full Metal Jacket. And when the Ed 209 robot malfunctions in the boardroom, it was a boardroom that the theater was in the shadow of. And the audience went crazy. Those elements were, we were allowed to portray. And again, I think because of Mike Medavoy and Orion, the way the screenplay was developed without oversight was a very, very important aspect of that. We were given a platform and a megaphone without any interference, without any filters.
Nice shooting, son. What's your name?
Murphy.